Hello, and welcome to today's episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. My name is John Shipley. I am your host and beat reporter, and I've been your beat reporter covering the Jacksonville Jaguars for On SI every single day since August 2019, and we are continuing to move forward through another offseason together. As always, you can find all of our 100% free, 24/7 boots on the ground content every single day on social media such as Facebook and Twitter when you follow us at Jaguars on SI. You can also find us at www.si.com/NFL/Jaguars. All right, folks, thank you for joining me for today's episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. Today, we are going to talk about the three biggest questions facing the Jacksonville Jaguars as they exit the offseason program and now look forward toward training camp. I think that when you look at the totality of the Jaguars offseason, obviously a ton of moves, a ton of change. I'd say over a third of the roster has been, already overhauled, if not more than that, by the new regime of James Gladstone, the general manager, Liam Cohen, head coach, and EVP of football operations, Tony Bazzelli. It is clearly an era of new in Jacksonville, but there are still some looming questions facing this Jaguars team. The biggest looming question, I believe, when you just look at the overall big picture is how far can this Jaguars defense come in year one? And by year one, obviously, the year one of new regime, Anthony Campanile, the defense coordinator, Liam Cohen, head coach, a whole new defensive staff. I believe only one defensive coach was retained from last year's staff, and it was a defensive, it's like an assistant position coach, almost like a quality control coach in many ways. Most of the guys who were retained, there were two on offense, two on special teams, not very many on defense. Jaguars clearly wanted to overhaul that entire defensive scheme, entire defensive unit, entire defensive philosophy this offseason. So can the Jaguars turn things around quickly under Campanile? The Jaguars were amongst the league's worst defenses in pretty much every meaningful metric last year, whether that's yards per game, points per game, EPA, success rate, whatever you want to call it. The Jaguars defense was downright bad last season. There was a lot of hope for the Jaguars defense last year. I mean, I was on record saying I thought with a good year, Ryan Nielsen could even get head coach looks, and that clearly aged about as poorly as the take could for last season, right up there with my Brian Thomas Jr. fourth in targets. I think that when you look at the question of can they turn the defense around, I think you have to answer first, what exactly is that? What's the definition of doing that? To me, if you can get to top 18 to 20 defense this season, obviously, is that great overall in the big picture general sense? No. But considering how bad this defense was last year, I think taking it from arguably the league's worst defense and one of the worst of last 4 to 5 years and turning it into a relatively average defense compared to the rest of the NFL would be a pretty big win. Now, there are a lot of questions on Campanile and his staff. Of course, it's a really young defensive staff, just like it is on offense. He's a first-year defensive coordinator, but definitely seems like the early signs of can this guy connect with the locker room? Is there buy-in? Is there? There were already some mumblings at this point last season about the defense that, just in terms of the players buy-in and leading, being led, etc. And obviously that was an issue throughout the season. Does not seem like there is nearly as many questions like that so far to this point. It seems like the buy-in on Campanile is real. So we will see moving forward exactly what that means in terms of how it turns the defense into a success. The next looming question I think facing the Jaguars has to be about the running back position. Who is going to lead Liam Cohen's backfield? He did wonders with Tampa Bay's rushing attack last year. Tampa Bay had been one of the worst rushing offenses in football for years. And he comes in there and they become one of the best rushing offenses in football. Now, they definitely invested a lot in the offensive line. You have Tristan Wirfs. He had a second-round right tackle. I believe a second-round guard. You had a first-round center. But even with those additions, Cohen, in my opinion, proved to be the difference maker And he showed that a productive run game can just open things up in ways that you can't even imagine for your quarterback. A big reason Baker Mayfield had the success he had last year was because of how well Tampa Bay was running the football, how well Bucky Irving was playing. It simply opens up so many more opportunities, more advantageous pre-snap, looks, gives you more chances for play action, which can result in more explosive plays, especially play action from under center. The question in Jacksonville, they've obviously invested a lot into the offensive line. Cohen's obviously going to bring his own twist on the running scheme. But who's going to be the workhorse? They have 4 running backs who I believe will make the 53-man roster in Travis Etienne, Tank Bigsby, Bayshal Tootin, and LaQuint Allen. And each brings something different to the table. Etienne is, I'd say maybe the most versatile. He can be very explosive on zone runs. You can use him on manufactured touches. He can, be a weapon as a check down or in the screen game. Then you look at Tank Bigsby. If you're looking at strictly gap scheme runs, stuff like wham, trap, when you have pulling guards, he's their best downhill back. He's somebody who he can be a punishing, bruising runner. He has to obviously hang on to the ball. He has to prove that he can be somebody who isn't a liability on the field on third down, in my opinion. But he definitely brings some traits to the table that Etienne and the other running backs don't. Then you look at Tootin. Tootin has absolutely phenomenal speed. One of the fastest players on the team, just pure straight line speed and explosiveness speaking. True 4.33 kind of guy. He can be a home run hitter from anywhere on the field. He looked like he was picking it up a little bit by the end of minicamp. And it's just a question of, can he find consistency as a rookie? And can he ensure he doesn't have any fumbling issues stack up either? And then finally, LaQuint Allen, he was the last guy they drafted, but he really impressed over the course of the offseason with his pass pro, his pass catching. He looks like a guy who, even as the 4th running back, can potentially kind of carve out a role on third downs moving forward. So who will be the lead back for this unit? Who will take over the lion's share of the carries? And even will there be a lead back? All 4 of these guys bring something different to the table. Will the Jaguars use all 4 of them in these different ways? I think it is very much so worth wondering and worth considering. And to me, the final question facing the Jaguars, it's probably the most obvious one. Can Liam Cohen get the most out of Trevor Lawrence? Trevor Lawrence, to me, is an immensely talented quarterback. He has the talent that makes him a franchise guy. I don't think there's any question about that. But the last 2 years, and really 3 of his first 4 years in the NFL, have really been marred by injuries and inconsistency from him, around him, and disappointment. His rookie year obviously was a complete debacle with the entire Urban Meyer mess, the league's worst supporting cast. I mean, the wide receiver group he had that year, absolutely abysmal. And then, 2022, Doug Peterson comes in. They pay big money for Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram, Zay Jones, those kind of guys. And ultimately, he has the best year of his career. Still throws about, 25 touchdowns, I believe it was, which I think is still his career high to this point. And the question is now, after the last 2 years in which injuries to his shoulder, concussion, a knee injury, ankle injury, and inconsistencies around him, and even some poor stretches for him. Before he got hurt last year, he was having a pretty good stretch. But in that first really month of last season, I think was the worst he's played since he was a rookie. So can he finally become more consistent? Can he kind of, finally turn that talent and those traits into production? That's the biggest question facing the Jaguars in 2025. I don't think Trevor Lawrence has any questions facing him, as we've said in earlier podcasts, as you guys have heard, about whether he's the Jaguars guy moving forward. But I do think it's important for him to have a good year, to have a positive year after how the last 2 years have really gone. The last 2 years seemingly have been tough on the Jaguars and on Trevor Lawrence. Lots of injuries, lots of either missed games or games where when he's playing, he's clearly not 100%. And the biggest reason the Jaguars haven't had on-field success the last 2 years has largely been because of the circumstances surrounding Lawrence. So can Liam Cohen and his staff and the supporting cast, can they, one, of course, keep Lawrence healthy for a full 17-game season and protect him? But then, of course, can they also get the production out of him that it seems like so many people are finally waiting to see. Thank you guys for listening to today's episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. Please like, follow, and subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and all other platforms. You can also find us on YouTube at Sports Videos on SI.